Manchester United are known for sorry, wrong photo. Manchester United are known for being one of the biggest football clubs of all time, being home to many footballing legends as well as the greatest manager of all time. The club has dominated both England and Europe for decades now. But how did we get here? In the 1860s and 70s, football was rapidly becoming widespread across England, and in 1878, Manchester United Football Club was born. Except it wasn't. The name was Newton Heath LYR Football Club. During this time, pretty much all football clubs were set up by railway workers. Newton Heath was set up by Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway, hence the LYR in the name. Initially, the team played against other departments and railway workers at the very first home ground at North Road. This was until Newton Heath were invited to join the Football Alliance in 1891. At the time, English football was split into two different leagues: the Football League, which was the first division, and the Football Alliance, which was the second division, with promotion and relegation being the same as it is today. The Football Alliance consisted of teams like Nottingham Forest, Small Heath, known as Birmingham City today, the Wednesday, now Sheffield Wednesday, Burton Swifts, now known as Burton Albion, Crewe Alexandra, Ardwick, who are now known as Manchester City, Bootle, who dissolved in 1893, Lincoln City, Grimsby Town, Waswell Town Swifts, now Waswell FC, and Birmingham St George's FC, who dissolved in 1892. In their first season, they managed to place second, just 2 points behind eventual winners Nottingham Forest. The next year, both the Football League and the Football Alliance merged to create the Football League. In their first season of the Football League, they came last, but somehow they managed to stay up. Don't ask. But don't worry, because the next season they came last again, this time actually getting relegated to the second division. During the early 1900s, United weren't in the best places. They had a pretty large debt and nearly went bankrupt, and the club would have completely dissolved if it wasn't for a dog. Yeah, a dog. Let me explain. The club decided to hold a 4-day bazaar in an attempt to raise some money in order to clear the debts. After it was finished, club captain Harry Stafford's dog escaped with a collection tin full of money. He managed to find his way to the local brewer John Henry Davies, whose daughter loved the dog so much that he decided to find out more about the collection tin. Both the dog and the tin were returned to the club and saved them from bankruptcy. Around a year after this whole incident, the same brewer, John Henry Davies, became the club president, and in his first week in charge, he managed to change the club's name from Newton Heath to the infamous Manchester United. But it wasn't as easy as that. He was about to name the club Manchester Celtic. Goodness, that one didn't happen. Through the early 1900s, their fortunes began to turn around, and in 1908, Manchester United won their first ever championship. This was mainly thanks to Man City being forced to sell most of their team due to a scandal they were involved in. Not the first time I've heard that one before. In 1910, they left their old stadium, Bank Street, due to the bad conditions and moved to the infamous Old Trafford, where they still are to this day. Throughout the next decade, there wasn't much that really happened. In the 1920s and 30s, there was a bit of back and forth between the first and second division, and in 1939, World War II broke out, leading to the suspension of all games. Old Trafford was bombed by the Germans, forcing them to move the main road, otherwise known as Manchester City Stadium, until 1949. But it wasn't until 1945 that things really started to kick off. World War II had just finished, leading to the managerial appointment of Matt Busby. You might have heard of him. Off the bat, he completely took authority over team selection, transfers and training sessions, as well as putting 7 star players up for transfer. This eventually paid off when Busby led the team to second place league finishes in both 1947 and 1948. They also won the FA Cup in 1948 after beating Blackpool 4-2, claiming their first major trophy in 37 years. At the start of the next season, Busby began selling lots of their older players and replacing them with young reserve players. These group of players were regarded as the Busby Babes. You probably heard of them before. These players were scouted by Joe Armstrong, the club's main scout at the time. He found gems like Bob Bishop, Dennis Violet, and most notably Duncan Edwards. The team was high flying and won their first league title in 41 years. But they weren't done there, as in 1956 they won the league again by an 11-point margin. Following this, they were the first English club to participate in the European Cup. The next season was also pretty successful, as a young Bobby Charlton burst onto the scene, scoring 10 goals. The club beat Man City in the 1956 Charity Shield and got to the FA Cup final. However, they played without their main goalkeeper Ray Wood, leading to a 2-1 loss to Aston Villa. United's first European game was against Anderlecht. They managed a 2-0 win in Belgium, then proceeded to win 10-0 back in England. This is still their biggest win to date in a European game. They then went on to knock out both Borussia Dortmund and Athletic Bilbao before losing to Real Madrid in the semi-finals. But it wasn't until 1958 that things took a turn for the worst. On the 6th of February 1958, the team travelled to Yugoslavia to play Red Star Belgrade in a quarter-final game of the European Cup. The game finished 3-3, but as United already won 2-1 at home, they were supposedly through to the semi-finals of the Cup. The team got back onto the plane, which was being flown by pilot, captain James Thane, and co-pilot Kenneth Raymond. At 1:15 p.m, the plane landed in Munich for refueling. 2:19, the control tower at Munich was told the plane was ready to take off. However, Raymond abandoned takeoff after Thane noticing that the engine sounded odd when accelerating. A second attempt was made 3 minutes later, but it was called off 40 seconds into the attempt because the engine was running off an over-rich mixture, causing them to over-accelerate. After the second failure, the players returned to the airport lounge. By then, it was starting to heavily snow in Munich, and it looked practically impossible for the plane to continue the journey home. Duncan Edwards sent a telegram to his landlady back in England, simply saying, "All flights cancelled, flying tomorrow, Duncan." Thane told the station engineer Bill Black about the issue. He suggested that since the opening the throttle more slowly had not worked, the only choice was to keep the plane in overnight for repairs. But Thane was anxious as he didn't want United to miss their upcoming match, so he suggested opening the throttle even more slowly would suffice. The challenge is that the plane wouldn't take off until further down the runway, but with the runway being nearly 2 kilometers long, he believed it wasn't going to be a problem. So after only 15 minutes, the players and the staff were called back onto the plane, despite thinking that it wasn't going to be ready until the next day. 2:56 p.m. All the players and staff were on board, with Thane and Raymond getting the plane moving again. 2:59. They reached the runway holding point where they received clearance to line up ready for takeoff. 3:02. Final checks were made in the cockpit and they were ready to take off. However, they only had a 2-minute gap to do so. 3:03. They confirmed that they were going to take off to the control tower. The plane began to accelerate, throwing up slush as it began to speed up. Thane then called out the plane's velocity. The plane reached 80 knots. V1, he announced, at which it was no longer safe to abort. They had to commit. Raymond listened for the call of V2, meaning it was a speed of 119 volts, which was enough to lift it off the ground. 90. 100. 110. 117. 112. The speed dropped. Then 205. The plane skidded off the runway, crashed into the fence surrounding the airport, and across the road before the wing was torn off as it caught a house. It was a race against time to escape before the plane exploded. The stewardesses Rosemary Cheverton and Margaret Bellis were the first to leave through the emergency window, as well as pilot, captain James Thane. Meanwhile in the cabin, goalkeeper Harry Gregg was regaining his consciousness. At first, he thought he was dead. "I didn't dare to put my hand up. I thought the top of my head had been taken off like a hard-boiled egg," he said after the incident. While regaining his consciousness, he saw a light above him. He manages to kick a hole wide enough for him to escape. He also manages to rescue teammates Bobby Charlton and Dennis Violet, who were strapped into their seats away from the wreckage. In total, 23 passengers died. Co-pilot Kenneth Raymond. 8 Manchester United players: Jeff Bent, Roger Bryan, Eddie Coleman, Mark Jones, David Pegg, Thomas Taylor, Billy Whelan, as well as Duncan Edwards, who at first survived the crash but died in hospital 15 days later. Club secretary Walter Crickmer, trainer Tom Curry, chief coach Bert Wally, as well as journalists Frank Swift and Donny Davies, died in the crash. Two key players, Jackie Blanchflower and Johnny Berry, were critically injured and never played for the club again, in addition to manager Matt Busby being seriously injured. After the crash, Matt Busby was in hospital for 2 months, recovering from multiple injuries, with his chances of survival being no better than 50%. While Busby was in hospital, his assistant Jimmy Murphy took charge. The team greatly struggled as it was near fully made of reserve players, winning only 1 out of 14 matches after the Munich air disaster, putting them in 9th place by the end of the season. Despite their poor form, they managed to beat AC Milan at Old Trafford in the European Cup, only to lose 4-0 at the San Siro. Real Madrid went on to beat AC Milan that year, and Madrid suggested the idea of awarding Manchester United with the trophy that year, but the idea failed to materialise. After being discharged from hospital, Matt Busby travelled to the Swiss town Interlaken to rest. During his stay, he felt like giving up entirely, until his wife said to him, "You know, Matt, the lads would have wanted you to carry on." Little did she know that this one sentence would change the club forever. This statement single-handedly lifted Busby from his depression, and he returned back to Manchester to watch his team play the 1958 FA Cup final. Despite losing the final 2-0, Busby returned as manager for the next season. Throughout the next few seasons, several signings were made in an attempt to rebuild the squad, including Noel Cantwell, Maurice Setters and Dennis Law. He at the time broke the transfer record after United signed him for $115,000. However, after all these signings, United were in an even worse position. The team's form was very inconsistent, leading to finishing 19th place in the 62-63 season, despite winning the FA Cup the same year. After the crash, Matt Busby wanted to change the club's nickname. At the time, it was the Busby Babes, but Busby felt it was inappropriate, so he decided to change the name. He looked at English rugby club Salford, who were touring France wearing the red shirt and calling themselves the Red Devils. Busby liked the idea and declared Manchester United should be known as the Red Devils, with the club crest now being changed to a devil in the centre holding a pitchfork, and thus this was the birth of Manchester United as we know it. In 1961, Manchester United scout Bob Bishop was in East Belfast watching an under-16s football game, and there was one kid that caught his eye. Straight after the game, he telegrammed Matt Busby saying, "I think I found you a genius," and his name was George Best. He was given a trial and eventually signed by United's chief scout Joe Armstrong. He made his professional debut on the 14th of September 1963 against West Brom, and by the 63-64 season he was a regular starter alongside Dennis Law and Sir Bobby Charlton. This trio became known as the United Trinity and brought United back up to the top. United would go on to finish the next season second, and then won the league in the 1964-65 season. In that same season, United went on a run of 13 wins in 15 games. The rebuild was complete, with the United Trinity taking the league by storm, with all three of them winning the Ballon d'Or. Dennis Law in 64, Charlton in 66 and Best in 68. United won another league title in the 66-67 season, going unbeaten in their final 20 games and finishing the season off with a 6-1 win over West Ham, qualifying them for the European Cup the next season. Manchester United's 67-68 European run was one never to forget. It began with a comfortable 4-0 win against Maltese side Hibernians, then a rather tough 2-1 win against Bosnian side that team, followed by another rather 2-1 win against Polish side. I'm not even going to bother pronouncing that. They moved on to the semi-finals and faced Spanish giants Real Madrid. Man United managed to grab a 1-0 win at Old Trafford, but it wasn't a big advantage to take to the Bernabeu. Before the game, Dennis Law was suffering from a knee injury, so Busby decided to start 36-year-old defender Bill Fuchs. The game started poorly for United as Real Madrid dominated. They led 3-1 at half-time or 3-2 at aggregate. All United needed were 2 goals to see them through. United fought back in the second half, but it wasn't until the 73rd minute until David Sandler managed to level the score. All they needed was one more goal, and then in the 80th minute George Best passed it to 36-year-old Bill Fuchs, who buried it into the bottom corner. They won the game 4-3 in aggregate and met Benfica in the final at Wembley. After a quiet first half, United fought hard in the second half, leading to Bobby Charlton opening the score in the 53rd minute. This was quickly matched as Benfica equalised in the 79th minute. Time was running out with the game being forced into extra time, and then, in the 92nd minute, George Best did the unthinkable. He took the ball and dribbled it through the defence, round the goalkeeper and scored. But United weren't done yet, because just 2 minutes later, 19-year-old Brian Kidd added another to the tally, and then in the 99th minute, Sir Bobby Charlton slotted another in to put the final nail in the coffin. The game finished 4-1 to United, and they were crowned as the European Cup winners for the first time in their history, with George Best being called El Beatle by the Portuguese media after one of the best performances of his career. But of course, all eras come with an end. With players like Bobby Charlton and Shay Brennan now in their early 30s, as well as Dennis Law in his late 20s, the squad was slowly aging, and thus, on the 14th of January 1969, after 1,120 games over a 24-year stint, 5 league titles, 2 FA Cups, 5 Charity Shields and a European Cup, Sir Matt Busby announced his retirement as Manchester United manager. And it's safe to say he is still remembered as one of the greatest managers in the club's history. After Sir Matt Busby's retirement, his assistant Wilf McGuinness was appointed as the club's first team manager, but it was a disaster. After an 8th place finish in their first season and a poor start to the 1970-71 season, he was sacked after only 18 months in charge. The 70s and 80s were filled with lots of different managers just trying to find that Busby replacement, but it was looking very unsuccessful. It got so bad that they reappointed Matt Busby for half the season just to get them out the relegation zone, which he managed to do with ease. During the early 70s, George Best became a big problem. Constantly partying and getting into trouble, this had a big impact on his career. And at the start of the 1971-72 season, he announced his retirement from football, being only 25 years old. However, he quickly changed his mind and returned to the Man United squad only 4 days later. This didn't stop him getting into trouble though. Best behaviour didn't help the club as it continued in a downward spiral. After the sacking of Wilf McGuinness, the club appointed former Leicester City manager Frank O'Farrell, but this went down as a lead balloon after a disastrous 9 games without a single win. They were planning to sack him, and after a 5-0 loss to Crystal Palace, he was sacked on the 19th of December 1972. During this time, all of Busby's players were seriously ageing, with Billy Foulkes retired, and both Bobby Charlton and George Best, again, announcing that they would retire at the end of the 72-73 season. A rebuild needed to happen, and it needed to happen fast. On the 22nd of December 1972, Scotland manager Tom Ducey joined United. Yeah, let's pause here a sec. Yes, I know it's not meant to be pronounced Ducey, and I know it's meant to be pronounced Doherty. I don't know why, but when I was recording it, I pronounced it as Ducey. So just endure it for about 2 minutes. Straight off the bat, he immediately began to rebuild the squad by making lots of prospect signings, as well as selling Dennis Law to Manchester City on a free transfer. Oh aye, and George Best reappeared for the 3rd time. However, despite the attempted rebuild, this ended up being the worst season ever at the club. United were caught in the relegation battle, and it came down to the final game of the season. United faced Manchester City, needing 1 win to stay up, and unfortunately they lost 1-0 after Dennis Law, out of all people, slotted a goal into the bottom corner, sending United to the 2nd division for the first time in 36 years. But fortunately, United managed to bounce back and return to the top flight the next season. Their run of form continued as they were sitting at the top of the 1st division by Christmas of the 75-76 season. That was until their form slipped in the second half of the season and managed to finish 3rd. Throughout the next 2 seasons, they did pretty well. Lots of new young players found their way into the team. The rebuild was really looking up for them. However, that all came to a halt when news broke of Tommy Ducey having an affair with Mary Brown, the wife of team physiotherapist Lawrence Brown. And after all this went down, the club knew things couldn't continue and he was therefore sacked. The club replaced him with Dave Sexton, who didn't really have an impact at the club, so we're not going to go through his time. He lasted a few years, then was sacked at the beginning of the 80-81 season. The search was on for a new manager, and after a bit of consideration, it was Ron Atkinson who got the job. Within his first few seasons, he broke the transfer record after signing Brian Robson from West Brom for £1.5 million. But this paid off as Robson became the club captain and is still the longest serving captain ever ever wearing the armband for 12 years. The club started the 81-82 season very strongly, bringing an attractive style of football to the club. He finished third in his first season. He also won the FA Cup final after a 4-0 win to Brighton, and although he got to the League Cup final for the first time ever, they lost 2-1 to Liverpool. They continued their momentum into the next season, starting by winning the Charity Shield after getting their revenge in a 2-0 win against Liverpool. And although being knocked out early in the FA Cup to 3rd Division side Bournemouth, they finished the season with a respectable 4th place. In the same season, Welsh striker Mark Hughes made his debut for the club and became a regular starter for him. He scored 24 goals in the following season, which earned him Young Footballer of the Year award. The club kept their consistent form throughout the next few seasons up until the 84-85 season. United started the season with 10 wins in a row and was a whopping 10 points clear in October. Everything was looking up for him until the new year, when their main man Brian Robson was sidelined for the rest of the season. This caused United's form to slump as they finished the season in 4th place. The next summer, the club also reluctantly sold Mark Hughes to Barcelona for $2 million after he developed a serious drinking addiction that was affecting his career at United. During this time, rumours started to circulate that Ron Atkinson would be sacked, but it remained a rumour as he still had a job by the start of the 86-87 season. The season started poorly for United with 3 straight defeats. They managed to pick up their first win during game week 5 when they won 5-1 against Southampton, but this was quickly short-lived as they went on to drop points against Watford, Everton, Chelsea, Coventry, and after this poor run of form, the club decided to sack Ron Atkinson. And lucky for them, they knew exactly who to replace him with.
Ferguson, many congratulations winning the Scottish Cup for the 2nd year, but it was close.
The luckiest team in the world. They were a disgrace of performance.
Were you surprised by the way that Rangers played?
Miller McLeish won a cup for Aberdeen. Miller McLeish played Rangers themselves. They were a disgrace of performance. They're okay in winning cups, doesn't matter. Their standards have been set long ago and we're not going to accept that from any Aberdeen team.
On the 6th of November 1986, a young manager from Aberdeen joined United as the club were desperately trying to find someone that can lead them back to the top. Straight away, Ferguson made significant changes to the youth system in an attempt to rebuild the not so great youth system at the time. In his first game, he lost 2-0 to Oxford, but it wasn't long before he picked up his first win as United boss in a 1-0 win against QPR. As time went on, results steadily improved, and on Boxing Day, they managed to beat Liverpool 1-0 at Anfield, making it their one and only away win all season. Ferguson finished 11th in his first season, which wasn't bad, but huge improvements needed to be made, and they had to be made fast. The next summer, Sir Alex brought in players like Viv Anderson and Brian McClare in an attempt to strengthen the squad, and astonishingly, they managed to finish 2nd in the 87-88 season, 9 points behind eventual champions Liverpool. This made the fans and the players optimistic, or in modern language, delusion. This optimism was strengthened even more as the club re-signed Mark Hughes from Barcelona, as well as Jim Leighton, Lee Sharp and Paul Gascoigne. The season started alright, and by February they were sitting in 3rd. However, it all fell through and injuries tormented the squad. After managing to win only 2 of their last 11 games, they finished in 11th place once again. After this, Ferguson wanted to bounce back, and he did this by signing Neil Webb, Mike Phelan, Gary Pallister, Danny Wallace and Paul Ince. However, a lot of these signings proved to be worthless, as by November 1989, United sat in 17th place, just 1 point above the relegation zone. It got so bad that it got to the point that Ferguson's job was in big trouble. News articles began to spread like this one from 1989 that says, "The time has come for Manchester United to sack Alex Ferguson. He's been in charge for more than a year and has spent £2 million on new players. Yet the team is now even worse than the one he inherited from Ron Atkinson. United will never win anything while he's the manager." It came to a point where just one game decided the fate of Ferguson's managerial career at Man United, and it was an FA Cup final against Crystal Palace. It was simple. If they won, Ferguson would keep his job, but if they lost, Ferguson would be sacked on the spot. Luckily for Fergie, Brian Robson managed to score a late equaliser to bring the game to a replay. This result pretty much saved Ferguson and kept him in his job. The club managed to pull it back slightly, finishing 13th at the end of the season. But little did Ferguson know that the next decade was going to be one of, if not the most successful decades ever for the club. In the early 90s, a group of 6 young talents began to form in the youth academy, going by the names of David Beckham, Paul Scholes, Ryan Giggs, Nicky Butt, Phil Neville and Gary Neville. These group of young talents became known as the Class of 92 and were essential in United's success over the next lot of years. But more about that later. At the start of the 90s, Ferguson began to turn the club's fortunes around and by making key signings like Peter Schmeichel and Dion Dublin. They finished 6th in the 1990-91 season and battled it out for the title in the 91-92 season. However, they lost to the Leeds after a poor end to the season. This brings us to 1992, where there's now a problem. A big problem. You see, English football was getting worse and worse. Hooliganism was rife, stadiums were a mess, and clubs felt hard done by. In 1990, London Weekend Television met with the Big Five, which consisted of Man United, Spurs, Arsenal, Everton and Liverpool, and discussed breaking away from the traditional English league to form a completely brand new league. Why? Well, it's simple. However, those 5 clubs turned into 22, and in 1992 the Premier League was born. United started the season slow, with Dion Dublin being ruled out in October. They were now lacking a proper forward to help them score more goals, so they decided to go for Leeds United striker Eric Cantona for £1 million in early November. Cantona swiftly became a star player in the squad, helping the team climb back up the table, and after storming ahead going their final 10 games unbeaten, they lifted the title for the first time in 26 years. Although this was a great achievement, Ferguson knew that work could be done to make the squad even better. In the summer of 93, they signed Irish midfielder Roy Keane for a record-breaking £3.75 million. He, as well as Eric Cantona and Ryan Giggs, dominated the league. 3 games in, they were top of the table and they kept that throughout the entire season, being 10 points ahead in October and 16 points ahead by the new year. This sheer dominance won them the title with ease, as well as the FA Cup to claim the first ever double. They were runners up to Blackburn in the 94-95 season, then won it the next 2 seasons to make it their 4th title in 5 years. During this time, Ferguson sold experienced players like Paul Ince and Mark Hughes, and instead of replacing them with big money signings, he trusted the youth players Nicky Butt, David Beckham, Gary Neville and Phil Neville. Oh yeah, and Cantona did that. The media pounced on Ferguson after refusing to make any big signings, but Fergie knew that these lot of players were going to change the club forever. In the following years, the club signed key players like Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, Teddy Sheringham, Andy Cole, Jaap Stam and Dwight York, whilst at the same time saying goodbye to players like Brian Robson, Eric Cantona, Gary Pallister, Brian McClare and Lee Sharp. This brings us to the 98-99 season, otherwise known as one of, if not the best season the club has ever had. During this time, many English clubs had achieved the double, otherwise known as the Premier League and the FA Cup, but no one got even close to reaching one of the greatest achievements known to man, the English treble, consisting of 1 Premier League, 1 Champions League and 1 FA Cup. The season started rather normal. Ferguson signed both Jaap Stam and Dwight York in the summer to replace Brian McClare and Gary Pallister. Despite losing the Charity Shield to Arsenal in early August, they grabbed their first victory in Game Week 3 against Charlton Athletic. The first half of the season was rather slow and by the new year they sat 4th. However, they picked up form and went on a rampage, going unbeaten 20 games between December and May to claim yet another Premier League title. However, the job still wasn't finished. They began their FA Cup run with an easy win against Middlesbrough, and despite going 1-0 down to Liverpool, they managed to score 2 last-minute goals to seal their spot in the next round against Chelsea. After going to a replay, United managed to edge it out in front to set up a semi-final tie against Arsenal. David Beckham's early strike opened the score, however Arsenal levelled and it was forced to go into extra time. The game was at a standstill, but that was until, in the 109th minute, Ryan Giggs managed to slot home the winner to send United to Wembley to face Newcastle in the FA Cup final. This proved to be a fairly easy game as United came out on top thanks to goals from Sheringham and Scholes to gift United with yet another double. However, once again, the job still wasn't finished. They began the Champions League campaign by finishing 2nd in a group which consisted of Bayern Munich, Barcelona and Brøndby. They faced Inter in the first leg of the quarterfinals, beating them 2-0 at Old Trafford, then managing to grab a draw at the San Siro to take them to the semi-finals against other Italian giants Juventus. Now it's safe to say this team was stacked with talents, like Antonio Conte, Didier Deschamps, Edgar Davids and a young Zinedine Zidane, all managed under Carlos Ancelotti. They managed to scrape a draw at Old Trafford, however this was a major disadvantage as they now needed to get a win in Turin against one of the greatest teams in the world at that time. And that was quickly realised as within just 11 minutes United were down 2-0. It looked like their hopes were gone. But then, in the 24th minute, Roy Keane managed to reduce the deficit and slot a goal in the hope that this goal would bring more momentum to keep going. And sure enough, just 10 minutes later, Dwight Yorke managed to level the score. However, this wave of momentum was quickly halted as Roy Keane was shown a yellow card, meaning he would be suspended if they were to make it to the final. That didn't stop him though, as he kept fighting, making sure Juventus didn't score. Despite this, Juventus piled on the pressure, trying to find a winner. United were damaged even more as Paul Scholes got booked, meaning he would also be suspended if they reached the final. United were hanging on by a thread, but that was until, in the 83rd minute, Andy Cole did the impossible and scored the winner in Turin against one of the strongest Juventus sides ever seen. They had done it. They had reached the final against German giants Bayern Munich in search to make history and crown themselves as the first English club to win the domestic treble. As United came out the Camp Nou, it was quickly made apparent that this Bayern Munich side was not going to be easy to beat. Within only 6 minutes, Bayern managed to score through a free kick and United's chances became small. Through the next 80 minutes, it followed the same pattern. Bayern piled on the pressure with chance after chance after chance. And although United had their fair share of chances, they couldn't follow through on them. But that was until, in the 91st minute, when Teddy Sheringham managed to score a last-minute equaliser to send the game into extra time. Or that's what they thought. Just 2 minutes later, United went another corner. This was their chance to potentially win the game. Beckham curled the cross into the box. And what do you know, on the other side of that cross was a young Ole Gunnar Solskjaer.
With the goal for Manchester United!
They had done it. They were now the first English club to win the English treble, practically crowning themselves as one of, if not the greatest club in England. But the question was now, what was next? After winning the historic treble in 1999, the expectations for the next season were set very high, and although they didn't repeat the treble, they managed to win the league by a comfortable 10 points. However, this would prove to be the only trophy they won that season after defeats to West Ham, Sunderland and Bayern Munich to knock them out of other competitions. Throughout the early 2000s, Sir Alex was given the difficult task of trying to transition the squad. As the years progressed, that 1999 squad kept getting older, meaning new fresh legs were needed in the team. He sold the likes of Teddy Sheringham, Jaap Stam and Andy Cole in 2001, Ronnie Jensen and Dennis Irwin in 2002, and the list goes on. And whilst getting rid of these old players, getting new players like Van Nistelrooy, Diego Forlan, Rio Ferdinand, etc, etc. During this period of phasing out older players and phasing in younger players, there's a short spell of poor performances. In the 01-02 season, United finished third, winning no trophies for the first time since 1989. At the start of that season, Sir Alex announced that he would retire from football management after over 12 years at the club. However, after words from his wife Kathy as well as his 3 children, Sir Alex decided to stay on for a few more years, which was a good idea as they bounced back the next season, bringing the league back to Old Trafford once again. Over the next few years, the title race was between 3 teams: Man United, Arsenal and Chelsea, who have just been bought by Roman Abramovich. It wasn't going to be easy for United to keep up. However, it was lucky for them they stumbled across 2 young talents, one from Portugal and one from England, that would change the course of United's ways forever. And their names? You don't need them. You already know who I'm talking about. a young Cristiano Ronaldo and a 19-year-old Wayne Rooney. Both signed in 2002 and 2004, this duo would go on to stir up not only the league, but the entire world of football. However, it wasn't their time to shine yet. Instead, it was Van Nistelrooy who was taking centre stage. He kept scoring goal after goal after goal, being United's top scorer not once, not twice, but 5 times. He was a key player in keeping United at the top throughout the early to mid 2000s. A mix of him, Park Ji-sung, Rooney, Ronaldo and more. It was obvious that this reformation of United was nearing completion, and after a few extra transfers like Michael Carrick, Nani, Anderson, United were fully loaded and ready to enter the 07-08 season, wanting to accomplish something that nobody has ever done before. Win the historic English treble for a second time. They were still the only club at the time to ever win the English treble. Winning it twice would practically cement them as the best English club to ever exist. And in all fairness, they had the perfect team. Van der Sar between the sticks, a ruthless back four of Evra, Vidic, Ferdinand and West Brown, a creative and unpredictable midfield of Scholes, Carrick and Hargreaves, and in my opinion the greatest front three to ever grace the Premier League, Cristiano Ronaldo, Wayne Rooney and Carlos Tevez. Their campaign didn't start very strongly, however. Within 3 games they sat 17th after failing to win their first few games. However, their form picked up and by October they had climbed their way back up to first position, which is where they mostly stayed up until the last day, where a 2-0 win against West Ham gifted them yet another league title. Meanwhile, in the Champions League, they were gripped with Roma, Sporting and Dynamo Kiev. They breezed past the group, setting up a round of 16 tie against Lyon. Despite struggling in the first leg thanks to an 18-year-old Karim Benzema, they got the better of the French side and moved on to the next round where they rematched Roma, just like the last time they comfortably beat them across both legs, and thus creating a semi-final clash against Spanish giants Barcelona. Now when I say this Barca team was stacked, I mean stacked. Valdez, Puyol, Yaya Toure, Iniesta, Xavi, Eto'o, Henry, and the main man himself, Lionel Messi. This was by far their hardest opponent yet, and that became apparent rather quickly. United managed to hold a draw at the Camp Nou, and miraculously managed to win at Old Trafford 1-0 thanks to a wonder goal from Paul Scholes to book their place in the Champions League final against Chelsea. It was fairly even in terms of lineups. I mean, they had the likes of Lampard, Drogba, Cech, Terry, Ballack, Cole and more. The game kicked off and I was made aware pretty quickly that United were the more dominant side, and sure enough, in the 26th minute, Ronaldo leaped up for a header and managed to score the opening goal, bringing United one step closer to not only their 3rd Champions League, but their 2nd treble. United kept pushing throughout the first half just to look for that 2nd goal. However, it was near impossible to break through Chelsea's impeccable back four. Just as the first half is about to come to an end, a huge fault at the back line lets Lampard scoop up the ball and put it in the back of the net to level the score. Evidently, this goal shook United as at the start of the second half, Chelsea were piling on the mountains of pressure. However, thanks to Ferdinand and Vidic, they managed to hang on until full time, where the score would stay level, forcing it into extra time. The first half kicked off and nothing happened. The second half kicked off and, well, Drogba got sent off in the last few minutes of extra time. However, they only had to play a couple minutes without him as the full-time whistle blew, forcing the game into a penalty shootout. All they had to do was score. Tevez stepped up, scored. Ballack stepped up, scored. Carrick stepped up, scored. Belletti stepped up, scored. Ronaldo stepped up, missed. The heart of Manchester dropped. Lampard then stepped up, scored. Hargreaves stepped up, scored. Cole stepped up, scored. Nani stepped up, scored. John Terry stepped up. All he had to do was put it into the net to create history and crown Chelsea champions of Europe for the very first time. Yeah, he fell on his ass. Anderson stepped up, scored. Kalu stepped up, scored. Giggs stepped up, scored. Anelka stepped up, saved. They had done it. Against all odds, they'd beaten their English rival and been the first club ever to win 2 trebles. Hold on a second, you're forgetting something. Oh yeah, United began their FA Cup campaign at Villa Park, beating Aston Villa thanks to goals from Ronaldo and Rooney. They moved on to face Spurs, who they managed to humiliate 3-1 thanks to a Ronaldo brace. They faced Arsenal in round 5 in what proved to be their hardest, most challenging game yet. Or so they thought. United destroyed Arsenal 4-0. They were on a demolition derby. All they had to do was beat Portsmouth to progress to the semi-finals of the FA Cup. It's Portsmouth. So yeah, after all this work, their historic treble was cut short from Portsmouth. Despite this, it was still one of the club's most successful seasons ever. But the question was now, what would happen next? Well, lucky for them, the next season followed a very similar path. They won the league with ease, as well as the Club World Cup, League Cup and the Community Shield. They made it to the semi-finals of the FA Cup before being knocked out to Everton on penalties. But all the attention was set on the Champions League. They cruised their way through the competition, beating Inter, Porto and Arsenal to book a place in their second Champions League final in a row against potentially the strongest Barcelona side ever. However, unlike last year, luck wasn't on their side. After goals from Eto'o and Messi, Man United lost the final 2-0 in what proved to be the final game for Ronaldo at United, as he would go on to join Real Madrid a couple weeks later for a record-breaking £80 million. This set a brand new problem for United. How were they going to perform without their main man? And sure enough, the next season was more of a struggle. They lost the league by a single point to Chelsea and were humiliated in the FA Cup, losing the League One side Leeds. However, despite this, they still played relatively well, with Rooney scoring 34 goals that season. The next 3 seasons followed a similar path. They were still playing relatively well, however they couldn't recreate that 2008 squad as well as their successes. They won the league 3 times over the next 4 years, with that 1 year being lost on the final day thanks to Aguero's last minute goal. Despite not being able to win another FA Cup or League Cup, they managed to go all the way through the 2010-2011 Champions League knockouts to rematch Barcelona in the final for a chance of redemption. However, this Barcelona side was even stronger than before, and quite frankly, this Man United side was a bit weaker than before. And despite their best efforts, they lost 3-1 thanks to Pedro, Messi and David Villa. This brings us up to the 2012-13 season, where they secured a deal for Van Persie in that summer from Arsenal for £24 million, and it's safe to say that this was one of the best decisions the club could have ever made. He went on to score 26 league goals, helping United retain the title once again. However, little did they know that this is the last league title that they would win in over a decade. The end of that season also saw the end of Sir Alex Ferguson's reign at United. After 1,500 games, 895 wins and 38 trophies, Sir Alex left Old Trafford and is still considered by far the best manager the club has ever had, and potentially the best manager football has ever seen. But there was a bigger question now looming. Who would replace him? Sir Alex decided on Everton manager at the time, David Moyes, to be his predecessor. Little did he know that this would be the beginning of over 10 years of chaos for the club. David Moyes came in at the start of the 13-14 season. He started, well, awfully. Players fell out with him and he got sacked. Louis van Gaal came in next. He did pretty well in his first season and even won an FA Cup in his second. However, the players fell out with him and he got sacked. Jose Mourinho came through the doors next. He did brilliantly in his first season, winning the Community Shield, League Cup and Europa League, and in the second season he came second in the league. However, the third season started poorly, the players fell out with him, and guess what? He got sacked. Ole Gunnar Solskjaer came in next. He came a respectable third place in his first full season and second in the next. However, he started poor in his third, the players fell out with him, and he got sacked. See the pattern? After Ole came Erik ten Hag, who despite his rocky start brought silverware back to Old Trafford, came runners-up in the FA Cup, and came third in the league, all in his first season. However, the next season would go on to be the club's worst in decades. They finished 8th in the league, getting grouped in a disastrous Champions League campaign. However, despite all odds, managed to beat City in the FA Cup to win some more silverware, bringing us up to the present day. Where do you think they'll finish next season? Leave your predictions below, and if you haven't already, watch part 1 or part 2 by clicking either one of these here. Thank you very much for watching, make sure to subscribe, and I will see you next time. See ya!